what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and earlier this week, patch 9.2 hit the PTR vendor build. Now, the vendor build means it is not actually available for play on, I guess, the live version of PTR. It's more so a Blizzard internal testing server. However, the good news is that typically when PTR builds do hit that vendor, we normally see them looking at how 9.1 was, and I believe previous patches like 9 or 8.2 or things within about a week or so. Now, obviously, there has been a bit of a delay in things from 9.0 to 9.15, and assumingly 9.2 is going to be a bit later than this, but honestly, with how fast things are going, I wouldn't be surprised if we see 9.2 PTR towards the end of next week, or even later, probably the week after. Now, I do think Blizzard most likely wants to do some kind of like developer, I don't have any inside information here, but some kind of like developer deep dive, like something similar like the Ian Hazzikostas Shadowlands updates, or maybe even the Ian Hazzikostas lore videos. We'll see, but I would assume that to some extent they want to try and work that in before the PTR actually hits, because as we all know, or as we are all speculating, there very well might not be a 9.3. I would assume a 9.25, but I would also assume they want to give some kind of general direction as to where Shadowlands is going, and really what's happening with WoW past 9.2, because, well, for the past few months, there hasn't really been a whole lot of transparency, but hopefully we're getting back to that being the norm. Now, over the course of Shadowlands, starting in 9.0, looking at 0.05, 0.1, and 0.15, there have been a handful of things that the player base has really been pretty vocal about. Some being, without spoiling the whole video here, obviously everyone's talking about tier sets returning in 9.2, potentially, and things like that. So today I want to take some time and talk about a handful of things I want to see change-wise for Warcraft in 9.2. Now, this is not going to be like Warlock based. This is like overall general Warcraft. And to be fair, there's a lot of things I could talk about in this video. It could be hours and hours long, but I wanted to keep it more just PvE related around what has been going on in the community and looking at how Sanctum was, I guess, initially released, and then how it ended up being, some changes, quality of life things, really just issues that are, I guess, sort of a hot topic as far as WoW in general is concerned. So with that being said, let's get into it, starting off with one of the most important things, I guess, well, depending how you look at the game, changes to some potential loot-based systems. So starting things off here, the very first thing is, it's a hot topic, but it's one I think that needs to be discussed and really is sort of fallen by the wayside lately with everything else going on with WoW, and that is hopefully the return of Master Loot. I know this is a hot topic and there's people on both sides of the fence here, but I think a return of Master Loot with maybe a bit of an altered way that it works would be really, really helpful and impactful for WoW, for raiding guilds, and just honestly the race to world first. And even outside of that, guilds that are just doing full guild runs for progression, whether it's a Hall of Fame guild, a Mythic guild, whatever, what have you, Master Loot was very, very important back in the day. Now, I do get one of the issues previously was that when it came to pugs and things, there were issues with people putting it on Master Loot, reserving items, ninjaing items, and that happens. It's an unfortunate part of it. And obviously I think there's a better way to work around that. And realistically, I think one of the best ways to bring back Master Loot is make it sort of guild bound. I think there was a bit of a limit on it last time. You had to have like 80% of the group, I believe, in the same guild to use Master Loot. I think towards the end of it, I could be wrong, but I'm totally fine with them bringing back Master Loot and requiring literally every single person in that raid to be in one guild. And if there's one person out of the 20 or 25 or however many you have in the raid group that's not in the guild, you can't use Master Loot. That sort of eliminates, at least to me, from what I can see, eliminates a lot of the issues with ninja looting, changing it to Master Loot last second, reserving items that, you know, shouldn't really be reserved. All the real issues that are happening with Master Loot. And that sort of feeds into, I think, one of the issues with Shadowlands, and just whether it's the race to world first setting or just, you know, the way that raiding has evolved in general. Now, obviously, we know tier sets are returning or are supposed to be returning in 9.2. So that's like sort of number 2 on the desired systems that should be coming back, hopefully, for this patch. Master Loot played a pretty important role when it came to tier sets, because number 1, you were able to allocate certain pieces of tier, whether it was Conk, Vanquisher, or Protector, I forgot the tokens even were towards the end, to certain classes and certain specs that had more powerful tier bonuses than others. Versus now, I mean, starting in Shadowlands, going back to Castle Nathria, if you can think back that far, about a year ago, I guess, I don't know how long it was, 8 months ago, give or take. Regardless, Blizzard actually nerfed the amount of loot that dropped per boss in Mythic. I believe Heroic a bit as well, which made acquiring loot pretty rough. On top of having no bonus rolls, on top of having no tier sets, it just felt really, really bad. It took a long time to acquire relevant pieces of gear that you were looking for. And if you thought that was bad, wait until tier sets come out with there not being any kind of Master Loot. Now, it did increase the amount of drops from raid bosses and things, and there still is a bit of an issue with tier tokens being based around, okay, is this like a glove boss or a helm boss? I think a better way to go with tier tokens would be just to make them baseline tokens, like a Conqueror token. You can buy a helm, shoulders, chest, whatever, what have you. But sort of like circling around here, master loot is a very, very important part of the game because it allows you to allocate those certain pieces in a higher like rating setting, whether it's world first, Hall of Fame guilds, whatever, what have you, to certain classes, certain specs that can actually use those pieces of gear a bit more than others. Maybe a bonus is stronger for this class than the other. And to a similar extent, when it comes to a race to world first kind of setting, it sort of means that you don't have to do as many split runs and people can play sort of whatever alts they want. Now, obviously they might do a couple cloth runs or a couple runs favoring conch tokens versus prot tokens and all that, but it opens up so many different options. I believe THE tweeted out earlier today or yesterday about, hey, can we bring back master loot because I want to play different alts besides one cloth, one plate, one leather, one mail, and these specifically allocated alts for gear feeding. Now, I don't think trying to combat the race to world first with gear feeding is ever going to be a winning battle for Blizzard. Whatever they do, we've seen whatever it is, whether it's group loot or master loot, world first guilds will find ways around that. They literally stack raids with people from the community now and trade gear to them, right? I believe when we were in Battle of the Zara lore, I believe Method required every single person in their raid to go engineer, craft the engineering helm, because the actual engineering helm was a higher eye level, and it was the Azerite helm. They crafted it, equipped it, and then they could go do whatever they wanted with it, but they were able to trade the actual mythic Azerite helms when they dropped in the raid, if they're better for a certain class than, well, theirs. There's always going to be some way to work around whatever restrictions or constraints Blizzard puts into, I guess, the race to world first scene or higher end rating scene, trying to be a bit degenerate with gear, right? I think the return of master loot is very, very important for the game for a plethora of reasons, but you can also, like I said, allocate that. You need quite literally an entire raid group from the same guild to actually have master loot enabled. Now, like I said, tier sets obviously hopefully returning in 9.2, master loot playing an important part in that. Tier sets are a very important part of WoW. Whether like you like them or not, overall having to go, if you're an arena player or PvP player, it's a bit unfortunate having to go into PvE based content to acquire your tier set bonus. Now, to a similar extent, I had to go into arenas and I don't know, it was 2100, I think last season, 1800, to acquire a helm with Rolling Havoc and Flashpoint on it as right traits in BFA, because I didn't actually have that exact combination in PvE. That's been an issue for a long time. I don't know how Blizzard really wants to address that, but regardless, I do think the return of tier sets is very important, because number one, everybody likes tier, right? Well, for the most part, whether you like it or not, the bonuses that they brought typically were fun, interactive, engaging, and it made your class feel different from tier to tier, barring it being like a passive, hey, you get 5% more haste. And towards the end of tier sets, Blizzard wasn't really doing those generic, here's a 10% damage buff, right? It was like, when this happened, this happened. When you generated a shard, this happened. When this happened, you summoned this thing, another pet, whatever, what have you. So that's important, I think, for keeping the game a bit fresh, because when Shadowlands launched, I mean, lock hasn't really changed. Most classes haven't really changed from where they actually began at the beginning of Shadowlands. Now we have all the covenants playable. It's something, but at least me personally, even in BFA going into now, I can definitely feel the lack of tier sets and, like, a bit of like my class changing from tier to tier. Now going all the way back to BFA or all the way back to Legion, there were some issues with tier sets interacting awkwardly with legendaries. We, like, back then we had 2 legendaries, 6 pieces of potential tier. So you had either 4 piece from the current raid with also 2 piece from the previous raid potentially, with 2 legendaries on, and then maybe like an Arcway Quartz Arts bonus piece. You had so many sets on, it became very restrictive. And then in BFA, we had Azerite on chest, shoulders, helm, which also limited, I guess, the overall availability of tier pieces a bit, because that's 3 out of 6 pieces, right? Now, when it comes to Shadowlands, we do have legendaries, but we only have 1 right now. So on top of tier sets returning, I do also really hope that legendaries are made so you can wear 2 at the same time. Now, people have said, why not make 1 covenant-based legendary wearable with 1 non-covenant-based legendary? But the problem is, at least for Warlock, half the legendaries suck for covenants. They're not very exciting. They're not very interesting. They're all based around covenant abilities, and that's fine for the most part. But it's really cool when you're able to actually, like, sort of mix in different legendary abilities, for example, like ones that change the way your class plays at its actual core, like giving you a 3rd conflict rate stack and reducing the cooldown of 1 with madness, which, hey, more backdraft stacks, more shard gen, more conflict rate, more chaos bolts being cast. Like, the way certain legendaries work together with each other just so well is what makes the double legendary combination possible or exciting, right? And that's also very similar to how tier sets work, right? When you have 2 legendaries on in a tier bonus that maybe affects chaos bolt damage or affects incinerate damage or changes something with the spec works, correct? And number 2, when it came to tier bonuses from tier to tier, it made it easier to sort of tune classes. Like, I remember at the end of Legion, Affliction Warlock had a very strong bonus coming out of Nighthold. I believe it was Nighthold, going into, it might have been Tomb Sargeras, but it was going into Antorus, the final raid. And we actually wore the 4-piece, I believe, from the previous raid going into Antorus with the Antorus 2-piece. But the Antorus 2-piece made the old 4-piece, this is confusing, really, really strong. So they ended up just nerfing the new 2-piece. And it sort of gives you a way to like tune classes in between each tier. Obviously, you're gonna have some pretty big outliers, like, hey, Feral Druids obviously are OP, right? They need to be nerfed. I'm kidding, just don't hate me. I think Feral Druids are great. But there are certain classes, it allowed for class tuning in the middle of tiers too. If a class is a bit weak, okay, you can buff their tier bonus. If they're a bit strong, maybe nerf it a bit, bring them a bit more back into line. And it also gives you ways to affect single target AoE depending what the ability was. Like, tier sets obviously are probably the hottest topic of 9.2. I would be extremely surprised if they did not return. They're great for a million reasons. So like the Master Loot, tier bonus, and double legendaries thing sort of all go hand in hand here and play into each other in a certain way, right? Now, honestly, I loved having the 2-piece, 4-piece, 2 legendary combination out there. I think it led to relatively intricate gameplay, and I really, really enjoy when you have certain talents and legendaries and set bonuses interacting with others and making things play differently, right? There were certain talents back then that I would never want to play now, but they were really good when they were amplified by my one legendary with my other tier bonus, and that was really, really cool. And it changed the way my class played from tier to tier, which is really, really cool. And something that Charge of the Domination really didn't do. They just sort of had, hey, here's your baseline intellect proc, or here's your blood proc, right? I played with blood bonus for a while until like way after Mythic Sylvanas, right? I couldn't get the helm to drop, and it was cool getting the bonus, but you didn't really feel anything. All I saw was a dot on a boss, and that was literally it. I couldn't really feel the passive healing, right? Tier bonuses changed the way classes play, and with how stagnant the stale classes are in Shadowlands for the most part, I think it's a welcome change. Yes, they are sort of borrowed power in a sense, but honestly, I think it's sort of towards the better end of the spectrum as far as borrowed power is concerned. Now, the last thing about, I guess, loot in general, rounding out this actual section here. So, Master Loot number 1, double legendaries number 2, tier sets obviously being number 3. The final thing here is actually bonus rolls. I really, really, really would like to see a change, or I guess them to bring back bonus rolls. Now, I will say having 9 potential tokens like we had, I believe, in WoD, being able to stockpile all of them and have 12 when a raid drops is way too excessive. I get they want to sort of reel in how much gear drops per week and per, clearing things. That's fine. But having those bonus rolls, at least to me, was incredibly interesting, because it was like, okay, I might want to coin, for example, let's say we're going to Sanctum, I might want to coin Remnant for the helm on the first clear. But if I get it to drop, I'm going to save this so I can coin Soul Render for the boots, the bracers instead, right? If it doesn't drop, we can go back in and kill it again. I can coin it one more time, right? Now, like I said, having 9 coins around is way, way too much. It injects way too much gear into the start of the actual raid. But I think like having 1 coin per week being purchasable, where the max is maybe 2, so you can technically game it and have 2 for the actual raid release and buy one that week, is totally fine. Most guilds, guilds are in the Hall of Fame. Most of them are going to clear the entire raid out week 1 on Heroic, barring Sylvanas being overtuned like she was this time around, and Race to World First guilds, going for top 5, top 10, they're all going to farm Heroic week 1. So having 3 coins, even 2 maybe, a cap of like 2 or 1, maybe a chance to buy an extra one, I think it'd be a really good thing, and it adds the extra bit of depth, excitement. It's just fun. It's exciting. It's engaging. And like, hey, in the end, okay, if I roll gold like I always do, well, it's better than not having a coin on its own. It took me literally way after Mythic Sylvanas was dead to get any kind of unholy helm from this raid. Remnant helm. I got the Sylvanas helm a Mythic before the Remnant helm. Loot scarcity is fine to a certain extent in Shadowlands. I actually think the way that loot is dropping now is fine. It feels about right per boss. 4-ish pieces drop, I believe, on personal loot. Obviously, that'll change in Master Loot if it comes back, but I do think that out of all those bonus rolls, number 1, making it easier to acquire tier pieces if Master Loot doesn't come back, and a handful of other things, they all sort of coincide and work well together. But I think bonus rolls are one of the things that sort of hold all that together. Tier bonuses, more loot, Master Loot, certain loot allocations. Bonus rolls help that a lot, make the game more exciting, engaging, and at least for me, week 1, week 2 coining bosses, a lot more fun than just looting 4 gold from my initial Heroic or Mythic boss kill. So, like the actual previous topic, I guess, about Master Loot and things, this is also sort of a hot take, but I think that when I elaborate on what I want to say here, I think most of the community will probably agree with me on this. Maybe you don't. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below, by the way. What a great plug. But yeah, so my other thing here is that I really, really wish, I hope and pray, I don't think it's very likely, but I don't think this is talked about enough. It's the removal of external buffs. Now, I guess external buffs is an okay way to word it. The removal of power infusion, kindred spirits, benevolent fairy, all that kind of stuff, to a certain extent. Now listen, I think priests should still have power infusion, and to a similar extent, I think it's Night Fae priests also have benevolent fairy, I believe. Why did Night Fae, or why do priests get everything? And you know, Kyrian druids have the actual kindred affinity ability. Now, I'm actually fine with these abilities, right? I think power infusion and similar abilities are actually really good tools when it comes to progression on certain fights, right? If, let's say, for example, a Boomkin or an Aflock needs that or can use that extra haste bonus during this exact point in the fight, let's say during Kel'Thuzad when we're trying to burn down stairs, or on Sylvanas during arrows, or Painsmith, whatever would have you, I think it's a great tool that can be used at certain points in fights, right? But as far as like past prog goes, I'm not a fan at all of these external buffs being, I guess, being able to be given to other players, whether it's PI, Faerie, Kindred Affinity, or whatever buffs are actually out there. It just, for the past like year and a half, ever since like the beginning, or I guess middle of BFA, probably towards the beginning of Shadowlands, to be honest, or during Alpha and Beta, when Power Infusion came back, I can say personally, it's really, really, really reduced the amount of interest that I have in raiding on farm and trying to parse. I was never somebody who went insane on parsing kind of stuff. I had some rank ones in previous expansions and stuff, sure. But I know for a fact playing Demonology, or whatever spec I'm playing, barring having an insane pull or being allowed to just solo the ads, but I'm not getting power infusion, I stand no chance. I'm not getting 7 PIs. I'm not getting, you know, I don't know, 5, 4, 3, however many you want to put here. I'm not getting 1, right? Now, even if I'm able to solo the ads, I know somebody else is getting a power infusion and probably a kindred spirits at that same time while also soloing the ads. Now, I believe Blizzard referenced or talked a bit about power infusion during beta. This is going way back, like a year or so ago. And somebody asked, hey, do you have any plans on changing power infusion? It might have been during Castle Nathria, because it's becoming sort of degenerate during parsing and things like that. And I believe their response was, we want the player base to govern how it's used, which is basically no. And you want the player base to govern, it's not going to happen. So basically, no, we don't want to deal with it. Which, I mean, to a certain extent, I understand, I get it, and changing classes and the way certain abilities work during the middle of the expansion is a bit of a pain. And it might, I mean, to be fair, like, okay, Demonology Warlock is one of the classes that benefits the most from having power infusion, and technically Kindred Spirits too, because, you know, faster tyrants, more cast, all that kind of stuff, haste effects, scale an insane amount with Demonology. But I know for a fact, I'm not getting 8 power infusions or 2 fairies or whatever the people are given. There's not even a chance in trying to parse with this. The damage is still good, but you're not going to, you have no chance. You stand no chance. I think it's, and from the discussions I've had with a lot of players in, I guess, the raiding community, it's not just me that feels this way. A lot of people are really frustrated with it because it's sort of just ruined any kind of potential you want to try and parse on a fight, right? I know that I can go into a fight and play it to an actual T, rotationally, everything. And barring a miracle, I'm never going to beat anybody on this list because they have 6 power infusions or 1 kindred affinity and a benevolent fairy. There's no chance, right? You know, now I'm not complaining saying, oh, you know, woe is me. Okay, I can't parse, whatever. It's fine. But I'm just saying, as far as I'm concerned, power infusion and external buffs like this that are able to be given to other players has really, really hurt my overall interest as far as like farm goes every tier. Whether it was like Nathria or even now in Sanctum, farm has never really felt worse because I go in knowing, hey, you know, there's not really a huge reason to compete here anymore, right? We'll still give it our best, but we're probably not putting up a top 10 or rank 1 because, well, we don't even have enough priests on our raid to give us many power infusions. Maybe on a fight this long, but it's pretty rough. And to a similar extent, being a priest or being a Night Fae priest, benevolent fairy, or a Kyrian druid, for example, it probably feels pretty bad having to give away one of your main cooldowns in Faerie or in power infusion, or I guess being a druid, depending what you're doing. Okay, you can just beg them for their link, but it has to feel pretty bad giving that away too. Now, I know power infusion is like one of these iconic abilities, and Shadowlands was the returning abilities kind of expansion, but I think it really missed the mark there. I would love to see power infusion, Faerie, and everything just become, hey, you give this to yourself, and that's pretty much it. Once again, I think they're fine tools on prog. Allocating those to certain classes and specs during certain points in fights is really, really good. Powerful, can help you blast through certain parts like DPS checks in a fight. Arrows on, I guess arrows are a decent example on Sylvanas, for example. When it comes to actual farm, it just becomes really, really degenerate. And to the point where, like I said, for me, it's really ruined my interest as far as parsing and even farm in general is just concerned this tier. Yeah, so external buffs, make them player bound. Don't remove PI or anything. Just make them able to go on the player, the caster themselves, and not really be shared with anyone. Warlocks lost dark intent years ago. Why did I bring my power infusion? I couldn't tell you. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is actually something that I hope they sort of do and they continue to do for every patch, being 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, new expansions, obviously, and things like that, is actually introducing new dungeons per patch. Now, whenever an expansion drops, obviously we have anywhere from, normally, what, 8 to 10 dungeons. Looking back to the Legion when Mythic Plus first started, we had, what? We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, right? 7, 8, yeah. 9, with Vault being a thing here, actually. No Violet Hold, and Return to Karazhan was later on, technically. But the thing was, we had these 9 dungeons off the bat, which honestly, Legion dungeons were great. They're coming back, obviously, in a few weeks, which is really, really cool. But the thing was, they kept introducing dungeons which got put into the Mythic Plus cycle over the course of the expansion. We had Return to Karazhan, which ended up bringing Upper Karazhan and Lower Karazhan. I believe we actually had Cathedral the same patch, maybe the patch after, and then rounding out the expansion with actual Seat of the Triumvirate, which for the most part wasn't really run anywhere near as much as it should have been. It was actually a really good dungeon. But the cool thing is that you always had what felt like new raid content every patch, new things to do, and you had a whole new dungeon, right? And the cool thing about that was I'm pretty sure a Seat and Cathedral were introduced in the Mythic Plus circuit right when they came out, which not the same about, Karazhan Upper and Lower, which that was sort of like a mini or like a large, whatever they called it, a mega dungeon, right? And to a similar extent, we've seen things over the course of BFA, I guess a bit over BFA with Mechagon, and then getting into Shadowlands, we've seen Tazavesh. Now, Tazavesh is great. I ran it on beta. We've cleared it out. It was really, really cool, barring the actual Murloc, this part of the actual dungeon right here. And then I never ran it again. I never even ran it on retail because it just wasn't really worth my time, I felt like. Now, I'm in there more for loot acquisition and things like that, min-maxing my character, and I do think it's pretty cool. The dungeon's actually pretty awesome, but it just feels like there's always this crazy amount of hype behind these mega dungeons, whether it be Karazhan or Mechagon or Tazavesh, in the patch they come out, and then we get them in Mythic Plus, the patch afterwards, where yeah, they're still hype because obviously we haven't had a new dungeon in 6 months, but I feel like a lot of that hype is lost when you push these dungeons back a patch or so, and it ends up being really unfortunate because whether it's overshadowed by another dungeon or just there's a lack of interest in actual Mythic Plus at that point. I mean, looking at the current maps we have now, for the most part, we have had the same dungeons: DOS, HOA, Tyrna, Plaguefall, Sanguine, Spires, Necrotic Wake, and Theater of Pain, or the entire expansion. 8 dungeons. Even going back into BFA, yeah, okay, we had roughly about the same at the start, but we ended up getting Mechagon a bit faster than I would say. We're going to get Tazavesh this time around. And in Legion, we had, both Upper and Lower once again, and then Seat and Cathedral introduced along the way. Now, I don't do crazy high-end Mythic Plus, right? I think I have like 2,400 score, but I can say, if I was somebody who did mainly Mythic Plus in this game, and I had to run the same 8 dungeons up until this very point, it's almost like having the same raid bosses for every single week for the entire expansion up until right now. Like imagine still sort of being like in Castle Nathria. Now obviously dungeons have more bosses in them, they're a little more in depth, but imagine being in Castle Nathria up until this point and still not having anything new for another 5 months. That's sort of how I feel like the general perception is from Mythic Plus players and things at this point. There's just not a whole lot to do. And yeah, there's new routes and pushing dungeons and getting new, pushing your scoring, 8 MDI and L qualifications and the Great Push are really, really cool. But one of the big things I hope Blizzard just keeps introducing, or starts introducing, keeps putting out new dungeons every single patch. Whether it's even 1 dungeon, 2 would be great to keep things a bit fresh. And to a similar extent, I wouldn't even mind seeing some Legion dungeons or BFA dungeons being mixed into things, sort of how they are with Legion Time Walking. And I believe they mentioned somewhere at the Great Push they're putting in 2 Legion keys, which is actually really, really cool to see. I wouldn't mind seeing them mix in, maybe even like Freehold. I don't know, a Tal'Dazar, throw in maybe a little bit of some Halls of Valor, some Maw of Souls, some Nelslayer action into the actual current seasonal affix combination for that expansion. Now, you might have to figure out a few things with gear, whether it be like, Gnawed Thumb Rings or the melee ring from Court of Stars once again, but I think it'd be a really good change. Number 1, keeping old content relevant or current, sort of like how other games do at this point. And number 2, even if they don't have a new dungeon coming out for the patch, it would sort of still spice things up a little bit. Hey, I as much as I enjoy Theater of Pain and Ruby Farm grinds, I don't really want to go run it for the 87th time this month. So that's pretty big to me. That's pretty important. And hopefully we see something along those lines if they have some kind of developer deep dive or a Shadowlands update over the next few weeks. That's one of the big things I hope for 9.2 and honestly beyond. It's sort of just increasing the amount of dungeons and gameplay we can see from Mythic Plus and just that setting in general. Now, in the end, all the class tuning, legendaries, master loot, double legendaries, tier sets, all the bonus rolls, all that stuff we talked about is really important, right? For the systems in Warcraft, I think, to be improved. But the biggest thing overall, which I think is sort of a no-brainer here at the same time, is consistency, transparency per patch, and in between patches. Looking at how, for example, Shadowlands Alpha and Beta started off, there was a tremendous amount of transparency. We had, you know, the developer deep dives, we had the Hazakostas, like, mid-alpha going into beta, like the little videos they put out for like half an hour, which they'd stream live on Twitch, I believe. They put them out somewhere, but you could watch them, and it would cover hot topics like conduit energy, covenants, soulbinds. Even when it was sort of like, even when feedback was being given on them saying, hey, energy shouldn't be a thing, and soulbinds should be swappable and all that, there was still some transparency there of, hey, we feel this is right, this is wrong. And in the end, like, obviously it really didn't pan out here. I'm not trying to get into some debate about, you know, Blizzard taking an L and admitting they're wrong. That was the previous React video. You can go watch that. But I think the big thing here is just transparency, right? Because when we sort of got like the developer interviews, I think Salute had Morgan Day, and I believe Preach had Ian himself, and like that, not really an interview, but like a conversation they had together. And that's the last thing we really saw during beta was, hey, conduit energy is an issue and this and that. And then after that was sort of addressed, keep in mind, conduit energy was supposed to be just, hey, whenever you picked up a conduit from a boss or whatever, you learned it, you could sock it into a soulbind. And if you wanted to change that soulbind and override that conduit, you lost it and had to go get it again. The actual like page of conduits that are swappable now was never even planned to be a thing. So there was some feedback taken into account there, but in the end, energy should never have been around in the first place. But the big thing I'm getting at here is once like that sort of happened, like mid-beta, early to mid-beta, there was just a complete lack of communication and transparency. Nothing was just there. It was just radio silence, right? And then we had obviously the Shadowlands pushback and things like that. Even going into like 9.0 with COVID pushing things back and all that, there wasn't really a whole lot of updates on, hey, this is what's going on. Everybody just assumed it was COVID, which, I mean, to be fair, hey, I'm not getting into that, but I'm just saying, there wasn't really a, hey, we're behind because of this, or 9.1 is taking a long time because of this, or hey, there's not much content in 9.1 because he pulled it for 9.2. I think that's sort of a known thing now. People have talked about it on their streams a lot, right? There really wasn't any level of transparency there, right? And initially, initially 9.1, from what I heard, was supposed to come out in July, but then it was pushed up out of nowhere to June, which, like I said, I'm assuming to try and push out 9.2 in December, but then everything else happened, and here we are. Now, obviously some things are a little tough to talk about transparency wise, right? But communication is important, is what I'm getting at. And looking at how Final Fantasy's handled their recent expansion launch with the what do they call it, the press tour or something like that, it's really, really cool to see, right? It's really, really cool, and WoW has all the tools to do that. Now I think the community council is a good step in the, and it's a good step in the right direction, right? It's important. The thing is, there's been systems like this in the past, private forums for feedback, for PvE, for PvP, multiple times, and in the end they haven't really worked out. Now putting this in the public eye, I think, is a good idea. For number one, for accountability, and I guess once again, transparency. But there's a lot of what ifs behind the community council announcement they made. And will it actually be a thing that pans out, or something that just sort of flounders around and is just, you know, gone after a year or so? Now, like I said multiple times, I think Blizz's best move here before 9.2 PTR hits is to put up a video or some kind of like interview or deep dive, whatever you want to call it. Probably like a pre-recorded video of Ian talking about 9.2, what's going to happen here, what the future is of Shadowlands and WoW in general. If there's a 9.3, I don't think there is. But just, you know, laying all this out, a timetable of, hey, this is what's happening here. The patch is estimated to be out here. This is what's going on, and we'll keep you on the loop. And then maintaining that level of transparency and communication for every 0.1, 0.2, 0.15, 0.25 patch. It goes a long, long way. Obviously, hey, some things could have been made better in alpha and beta, and feedback could have been taken into account. I agree. I don't disagree. It's like beating a dead horse at this point. But yeah, I think this is a good step in the right direction, but there's a lot of what ifs around it, and Blizz really needs to, I think Blizz knows this is like, they got to get this right. I think let's just player transparency, communication is key here. Another patch and a half of radio silence is, it's not going to be good. So that's probably, outside of all these systematic changes, the biggest thing that WoW and Blizzard needs to take care of heading into 9.2 and beyond. I sort of forgot. Class tuning. A commitment to class tuning every patch, whether it's a 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, or 0.15, 0.25, every semi-large, every patch, please. Dude, Kettles sold his soul for Boomkins to be good at 9.0. He didn't even think they were good in 9.1. Tedos, I remember, I'm looking at you. I remember during the Race the World First, I was next to you. You said Boomkins were bad this tier. Realistically, class tuning is something that needs to be done in every patch, whether it's a major patch, 0.1 or 0.15, 0.25, and sort of wrapping back around the tier bonuses and things. That sort of, once again, was a way to tune classes, right? Or buff classes, nerf classes, and make them actually feel a bit different from tier to tier. Now, 9.15 being a good example, Blizzard mentioned they were going to try and tune certain underperforming talents, abilities, things that weren't really taken over for a while, bad talents. There was one minor pass with like a couple random talents being changed, I guess, for a few specs, and I don't believe it did anything for anybody. The Warlock one was like so out of left field and just not good, and there's something else, right? With the removal of the AoE cap and certain classes being pretty OP in certain settings, Aflock had sort of a niche with AoE, like in Mythic Plus being sort of uncapped, but now that's just Windwalker territory and things. Class tuning is needed from patch to patch. I understand 9.15 probably had to come out sort of soon because 9.2 needed to get the PTR soon, I would assume as well, but I don't think that we should put class tuning in, whether it's a 0.1 patch or a 0.15 patch, on hold for whatever reason. If tuning needs to be done, which it obviously needs to be done now, it should be done, even if it means delaying a patch for a week, 2, or whatever. Because hey, you know, all the Boomkin memes aside, yeah, you know, things do get a bit stale after a while, and with the estimated release date for me being a few months for this patch, which we'll get into in a second here, yeah, wanted to buy class tuning in 9.15. Hopes for 9.2 at this point. So I figured we'd wrap it up with everyone's been asking, hey, what do you think is the estimated release date for 9.2? In the end, I have no idea. I have no inside information, but I think thinking logically and things, I've been saying February-ish for a while. Now, even before 9.15 hit retail, I had assumed that 9.2 would probably hit PTR pretty quickly after 9.15. And even though it's not on like current, I guess, retail PTR, whatever you want to call it, it's on the vendor build, I assume it's coming probably within a few weeks, right? So let's just assume next tier is a 13-ish boss raid, 12 to 13 bosses. If you look at like the raid testing schedule they normally do, typically it's like 4 bosses per week. They can add more bosses per day and make it up to 6, 7, whatever they want. Typically it's all of Heroic, all of Mythic, and maybe a couple bosses being tested again in between, like bosses that need a bit of help, right? So let's say, for example, PTR hits roughly, we're here. Let's say it hits, yeah, it's 4:30 in the morning, so technically it's reset day. Let's say PTR hits, I don't know. I would assume Blizz does some kind of like announcement, like stream, like, hey, this is what's going on with Shadowlands. Some Ian has a host deep dive, whatever, something along those lines, which they should do, by the way. Number one, for transparency and community, perception and things. And then they release PTR. So I would assume they announce it maybe towards the end of this week, do it next week. And let's say PTR hits, like here, like the 23rd of November, right? And they sort of hit the ground running with raid testing, right? PTR hits here. They have testing on like Thursday or Friday. Let's say it's 4 bosses here for Heroic. Let's say 12 bosses in the raid. Make it simple on us, right? Sorry, 2 bosses too. So let's go 2 bosses, like 4, 6 the week after. We're going into December here. 8, 10 bosses being December 9th. And I don't know, you can throw a couple more in here on the 15th, give or take. Maybe a couple of Mythic here. This would be like all 12 Heroic bosses, and like starting to get into Mythic. And you have Christmas week, right? Which obviously, like, they could do testing on certain weird days. For the most part, I don't really assume there'll be much raid testing over the holidays. I do initially think they probably plan on putting out 9.2 during Christmas, during this time frame, the actual patch. But I believe with everything going on, it probably got pushed back a little bit based off how fast the patch came out in 9.1. So let's say, once again, right around here, a Heroic testing concludes, a bit of Mythic testing. And then they pick it up again, probably somewhere around like here, maybe like one of these 2 days, like before New Year's Eve and stuff, right? Let's say Wednesday, this is like, 4 out of 12 bosses being tested on Mythic total, right? Going into January, you can do, 6, 8, 10, 12. There you go. A couple retesting bosses here. I would assume at this point, we're probably like super rough estimate, probably looking somewhere in February for a release, realistically, just based on the holidays, New Year's, everything coming up. And I would assume, once again, we probably don't get PTR for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, just based around what the assumption of Blizzard doing some kind of like developer deep dive. Hey, this is the fate of Shadowlands. This is what's going on and all that. I could be wrong, but I've been saying early to mid-February for a long time, with the raid probably coming out end of February or March for a while. And I'm still adhering to that. The timetable I put up literally a month and a half ago has basically been It's sort of almost been to a T. The pat 9.15 hit here. We've got a PTR sort of vendor build here. I'm still saying like early to mid-February, but we'll see where it goes. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'm actually not sure of the duration of this video. It might be a little longer than I intended, and if it is, my apologies, but I've been planning this video out for probably a week or so. I might have rambled on a bit more than I wanted to, but there's some big topics in WoW and things that need to be discussed, and honestly, like I said, some important things that they probably should hopefully bring back for 9.2 and beyond. So let me know what you guys think about all these suggestions and things in the comment section below. If I missed anything important that you think I should talk about, put it down there. I'll be sure to get back to you. And hey, if there's feedback to be given, well, you know, I'll find a way to hopefully find. I'll do my best. Drop it down below. I'll be sure to get back to you. But yeah, like I said, 9.2, I would assume is on the horizon within the next few weeks. February, I am guessing, is still probably the realistic release date. I don't think it'll be out in January with the testing you have to do and things like that, and the holidays probably pushing that back. But regardless, 9.15 is cool. I've been enjoying it. Covenant swapping's been legit. The Mage Tower should be out probably in a month or so. I think 9.5 has laid a pretty good structure for a good 9.2 patch. Everyone's going to have max for now with whatever covenant they want. You can swap at will, and I think actually having covenants being swappable for the Race to World First will change a lot. I remember when we were in Texas for the Race to World First last time around, there were a handful of players that wanted to change covenants for a different spec or whatever, but they really couldn't because either they didn't have enough time to swap and grind it out, or there was that 1 week like limitation, which once again, it was really unfortunate, really dumb to have in place, but it's gone now. So we'll see where it goes. I guess the question will remain forever. If they were swappable last year, would complexity limit boomkins have gone back Night Fae for the remainder of the actual raid, or would they have stayed Venthyr? Who knows? The world will never know. With that being said, thanks for watching the video, guys. Much love. If you liked it and want to see more videos, be sure to smash the subscribe button below. Hit the like button right down there as well. Any week wars, profiles, or add-ons to see here, you can grab for free off my Twitch. Well, I'm going to swing by anytime just to hang out. Also, feel free to do so. I want to give one massive shout out to my patrons. Thank you a million times, guys, for all support. I really, truly do indeed appreciate it. If you're interested in supporting, there should be a link somewhere up here or in the video description down below. Thanks again for watching, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.